Let me tell you why I've moved my pension. Now, I've always lived by one crucial piece of pension advice. Contribute a percentage amount equal to half your age. For example, if you're 50, then you should aim to contribute 25% of your salary into your pension. And if you're 20, 10% is sufficient. I constantly followed this rule and it allowed me to retire age 55. And my 55-year-old self was incredibly grateful. Well, the most common way to manage a pension is through your employer. Now, many employers offer flexibility in how much you contribute, while some others are actually really fixed on an amount. So during my consultant days at PwC and Deloitte, their pension schemes were really flexible and they actually allowed me to adjust the contributions, how much I paid annually as I saw fit, really. However, when I moved on to other organisations, their pension plans weren't quite as adaptable. I found that if I wanted to contribute, say, 20% of my salary, my employer capped the amount I could pay in at 10%. So at this point, I only had one option really, and that was to invest in a self-invested personal pension or a SIP. Now, at this point, I really discovered the advantages of a SIP. It was only actually after I opened one that I realised how flexible they really are. This sparked a new interest for me in how pensions work overall. And I began comparing my company pension performance and the fees that they charged. And actually, the long-term average nominal return for my company pension was about 6%. So after factoring in inflation, that left a real return of about 3%. Then you have to deduct the 1.5% fee they charge as a pension company for running the pension, and I was left with a meager 1.5% real return. Now, that's not a great return at all, I don't think. So when I opened my SIP, I researched the performance of the various index funders over the same period. I was particularly interested in one fund, which was the Vanguard FTSE Global All Cap Index Fund, and this tracks about 5,000 different companies. Effectively, it covers the entire globe. Now, the long-term nominal return on this index was 9%. Now, after deducting about 3% from inflation per year, that left 6% real return. Now, take away the less than 0.5% they charged as a SIP provider annually, this left me with about 5.5% real return, which is significantly higher than the 1.5 real return I was getting from my company pension. And let's talk about company pensions though. So the other half of the story is really important. Now, based on what I've just explained, you might assume that I stopped contributing to my company pension because of its high fees and put my entire 20% into the SIP. However, that's not what I did. It's not what happened because, as I said, it's only half the story, that really. So typically, with a company pension, your employer will match a proportion of your contribution. For example, if you're in a minimum scheme, you might pay in 5% of your salary, and your employer will then top this up and add 3% to make a total of 8%. Now, many employers also then offer the option to double your contribution to 10%, and they will double their contribution to 6%. That'll give you a total of 16%. Now, you don't receive this kind of employer match, obviously, if you're in a SIP. You're pretty much on your own in terms of contributions you make. Now, another fact to consider is that many company pensions offer some additional benefits as well, such as enhanced death in service or improved spouses' pensions. So the story isn't as simple as SIPs being inherently better than company pensions. For me, though, I didn't have a choice. I couldn't increase my company pension contributions above that 10% limit. And this really forced me into opening the SIP. So how about navigating your way around a SIP then? What's it all about? So when I opened my SIP, I had to be really careful because the marketing that comes from the SIPP when you open a new one, they often try steer towards one of their recommended funds. Now, while these funds are often actively managed by pensions experts, which actually sounds good, doesn't it? They also come with a management fee. And crucially, the vast majority of these actively managed funds perform actually worse than an unmanaged fund, which of course doesn't have a management fee attached to it. Now, I managed to avoid signing up for one of their default funds that they were recommending to me. And what I did is I chose a low-cost index fund instead. Now, many people who prefer to keep their investments simple will just open a SIPP, pick a single fund, and a common choice is the one I mentioned, is that all-world index fund. And that historically has returned about 9% over the long term. Now, more adventurous investors might opt for something like the S&P 500, the American biggest 500 companies, which generally offers a higher return than 9%, but also comes with higher risk as well. Now, for me, I wasn't interested in kind of high risk option. I mean, the All World Index for me offered greater diversification because it covered more countries around the world. And, 9% for me was an average balance between risk and reward there for me. So when I opened the SIPP up, a whole world of investment becomes available. I could invest in individual companies. I could pick Shell. I could pick Unilever. Anything that I thought would perform well. There's also the low-cost index funds. There's bonds and treasuries, and these actually loans of your money into governments and companies for which they pay you a return. So there's lots and lots of different ways you can invest. However, we need to remember here that we're talking about pensions. Now, a pension is not, well, it is something that we'll heavily rely on as we get older, but it's not something we should be gambling with. Now, for me, investing in individual companies is something I might do outside of a pension with some extra cash I might have, but not for a significant portion of my actual pension. That said, I do actually allocate 5% of my pension funds to what I call fun investments. And with this 5%, I try and beat the market. I don't then mind if I've got lots of safe kind of index investments to using 5% in higher risk investments. Now, in my experience, that 5% I've had in higher risk has performed pretty poorly compared to the 95% I have in kind of safer, low-cost index funds. And this is not unusual. It's fairly standard. There's not many people consistently beat the standard index funds. And if they do, it's only by a tiny amount, and it's usually due to luck. Now, why have I moved from a pension? Now, actually, what the title of this video is why I had to move my pension. So let me explain why that became necessary for me. So the issue with my SIPP provider that I initially chose, which was Freetrade, was that it didn't allow pension drawdown. Now, pension drawdown is when you reach retirement age, which was 55 for me, you can take your money out of your pension fund as and when you like. Now, every withdrawal gives 25% tax-free, which is a real bonus. And although Freetrade is a wonderful platform and I really do like using it, it doesn't offer drawdown. So I moved a significant proportion of my funds to another SIPP provider, which is Interactive Investor. Now, I chose them. I did quite a lot of research. And I found for me that they offered the best value for money and quality as well for what I was looking for. And they provided a drawdown account as well. Now, as it happens, I haven't actually used their drawdown facility yet because I've also got some defined benefit pension that actually pays me some lump sums directly. I'm currently using these lump sums to fund my retirement and actually leave my SIPP invested so it can grow. Therefore, I can't really comment on how good their drawdown facility is to use, but my analysis at the beginning showed that most users actually found it was really good. Now, my main pension pot is currently split then between Freetrade and Interactive Investor. And I intend to move all my funds from Freetrade to Interactive Investor when I start using the drawdown facility. But if you are interested in the research I put together when I decided to go with a SIP, then pop along to my website at timetoretire.com, and on there you'll find my email address. Just drop me a line and I'll send that across for you. Now, it's important to remember though, I'm not a financial advisor in any way, and the research I did just gives you some general information about the costs and type of facilities I have. There's no kind of recommendation in there or anything like that. Now, obviously everyone's situation is different, so what worked out best for me probably won't be best for you. And if you do need some advice on choosing a SIP or anything to do with your pensions, really, it's best to speak to a financial advisor before you make any decisions on your pension. Now, it was important for me to remember, though, that if my employer had had a flexible company pension, then this might have been the best option for me, and particularly if they'd offered a good matched amount. Now, it's worth also understanding how tax works with pensions. So when you pay into a company pension, your employer will generally take out your contribution and pay it into your pension account before they deduct any tax. Now, this effectively means the amount paid into your pension avoids income tax. Now, if you pay into a SIP, you'd think, oh, well, I'm going to lose out on that because, I've paid the tax and it's been paid into my bank account. Now I need to pay it into my SIP. But if you're a standard rate taxpayer, say 20% taxpayer, a few weeks after you've paid your money in from the bank accounts into your SIP, HMRC will add an extra 25% of the amount you paid directly into the SIP. Now, it's easy to think, well, 25% and get an extra 5% there. But it's not. You're only a 20% taxpayer, and therefore it's effectively the same amount as a refund getting paid rather than the amount you've saved at the beginning. Now, if you're a 40% taxpayer, to get that extra refund, you'll need to complete a tax return, and this amount will then be paid directly to you by HMRC, or might be adjusted in your future tax code, and that depends really on how much they actually owe you as a refund. It was important for me to consistently pay an amount that was half of my pension age, and that's got me to retire at 55.